Welcome to Mountain Accent Sewing. My name is Cynthia, and today I am sharing the second video in my beginner series. If you're interested in hearing about what sewing tools that I use the most, stay tuned. My most used sewing tool is my measuring tape. And I have one here that shows inches on one side and has centimeters and inches on the other side. I do prefer the ones that have both inches and centimeters, not only for taking my body measurements, but a lot of the patterns, if you use a pattern, say a US pattern, would have your measurements listed on their pattern in inches. But if you're using an indie pattern, and it may be one from another country, they might work in centimeters and meters. And so I find having one that is dual inches and centimeters the best. And like I mentioned in my last beginner series video for my top tips, is I do recommend that you take your body measurements every single time prior to making a garment. And along with other measuring tools that I use, and this is a measuring gauge, and it goes from 1 inch all the way up to 6 inches, and it also has centimeters. And I use this for multiple things. I'm not sure if it's showing up here, but like here's my 1 inch. And I use this tool a lot when I'm hemming things, but also if I'm measuring for button placement on a garment, and I can set this if I want my buttons to be 3 inches apart, and I can go down and just mark every 3 inches. I know a lot of patterns do have a piece that with the recommendation for the button placement. But with some garments, I find that it is helpful for me to say, put my first button here at my bust line, and then measure up from there and then down from there, depending on the number of buttons that I want. That way I know that I'm getting a good closure there at the bust line. But I use this measuring tool the majority with every project. And this one has been well used and a little warped. And I have another one somewhere that I'm going to have to find, because, yeah, this one has been very well used. We talked a little bit about scissors in my previous beginner series video, how important it is to have scissors that are designated just for fabric. And so, yes, I have these ginger scissors that are designated for fabric. I have a pair of scissors that are for cutting patterns. And then I also have an ergonomic pair of scissors for cutting fabric. Now, I also own a rotary cutter and cutting board and mat. But since I am primarily talking about tools that I use for most of my woven garments and even some of my knit garments, I tend to use this pair of scissors the most. Now, along with your cutting tools, most patterns, or all patterns that I've ever used, have places where you need to mark for notches. And I do have a special tool. I do have a special tool that I use for that. And that is these pair of little Fisker Snips. And this is perfect for marking notches. I also have a pair of Snips. And I keep these by my sewing machine when I'm sewing. This is what I clip loose threads with, or like the little long threads. I'm one of those that I snip threads as I go. I don't like to save those till the end. I know some people like to snip at the end. I prefer to snip as I go. Another essential tool or tools for sewing for me is having some kind of marking tool. So I have a couple of ones that I really like. I have this one that has the disappearing ink. This one is water soluble ink, so you can wipe it away with wetness, or chalk. And I particularly like this. It's a clover chalk that draws a pretty fine line with chalk. Now I do have some other chalk markers, and depending on the fabric that I'm using and the garment I'm making is the one that I decide whether I'm going to go with the ink or a chalk. Another essential sewing tool for me is having good pens. Now I have several pens that I choose from, but these are one of my favorites here, and these are for fine point, and I don't know if it will show on here, but it has a gripper point. And I also have a variety of other pens, and it's nice to have a pen cushion near your sewing machine. And I just have lots of regular pens for woven fabrics in this. And then I also keep a container of ballpoint pens that I use frequently also for knit fabrics. I enjoy making items that require you to have a point turner. So like a button-up shirt that has a nice collar that has points on it, or even a dress that has a nice collar with points, it is very helpful to have a point turner. This is my point turner that I have. Now it also has some measuring markings on that. So occasionally I have used this also to used to measure when I'm hemming, but it also has this nice point for turning, making a nice sharp collar point. And as I mentioned in the video the other day, it is extremely important to iron your fabric and iron your garment as you're sewing. Now I'm not going to show you my iron, but that is an essential tool, is to have a nice ironing board and a nice iron that you can use for ironing your garment. But in the matter of pressing, there was sometimes that I found that an ironing board just wasn't the right, that I needed a little bit more assistance. And I find having a tailor's hem an essential tool for me. Especially if I am ironing something that has a curved seam, or even fitting in the smaller point into like a sleeve, that I can get that seam pressed better, but especially with curved seams. Now the next tool that I use, now this is something that is not a sewing item, but I actually enjoy making buttonholes. My sewing machine, I'm fortunate enough that on my Singer Quantum Stylist, it does have multiple button hole preset stitches that I can select for creating buttonholes. But you still have to have a way to open them. And my favorite tool for opening that is a scaffold that you would use in a medical office. And since I do work in a doctor's office, and these things come packaged and they have dates on them, and one I got this when it had reached its expiration date that you can no longer use in the office, and I was able to get it, and that is what I use for opening up buttonholes. And it does have a very extremely sharp curved point, and it works great for opening up my buttonholes. I have one more sewing tool to share with you, and it is probably the most essential one that you will need, and that is a seam ripper. Now, I have several of these, and most sewing machines comes with one. This is one that I obtained somewhere else, but I use my seam ripper with not every single project that I make, but quite a few. So I would always keep one of these in your sewing kit. That concludes my top tools that I use in my sewing day to day. Now, I do have other sewing tools that I do use. Some of them I use somewhat frequently, but they are not tools that I feel like would be necessary that you would need as a beginner. But some of these that I've showed you today are things that I consider as being essential for beginners, but in my life, I find them the most essential tools that I have in my sewing world, next to the sewing machine, of course, and having needles and thread. And you'll always need those. I hope that you have enjoyed seeing this today. If you haven't watched the first video in my series, go back and check that out. And if you're not interested in this per se, I have other videos that I just released my Make 9 2024 review. You can see which items on my Make 9 that I made. And I have future videos coming your way, so stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.